Welcome to the MiSCA Adventure Info Session number two. This is the second info session. We had another one a month ago, and we're going to go into some other things. I'll talk about that first one as well. I'm Mark Ware. I'm the Adventure Event Director for MiSCA, going into the third year of being associated with MiSCA and putting on adventure for the organization. So first, I'm going to start with what we covered in update number one. I'm not going to rehash all of it, but I'm going to tell you what it is that we covered, so that if there's anything in there that you'd like to go back to, you can go to the YouTube video on it and see what it was. What we covered was what is an adventure event? What is it about? Why does MiSCA do them? And how does it apply to MiSCA and their mission? Where and when are this year's adventure events? And they're July 26th and September 26th. And I talked about each of those. Talked about what's new in MiSCA Adventure. Some things changed this year. We've got some feedback from people through surveys, through anecdotal information from various ways. And we've changed some things a little bit this year. And I talked about that. Answer the question, is a coach required on every team? And the reason I brought that up is because it might appear that a coach is required on every team because you see so many coaches on a team. And it's not the case, and we go into those details. Then I talked about what is a typical 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hour event like, and I kind of walked through what are the steps, what would you expect to run into in each of those events, and how do they go. Why do we need to arrive an hour early? I talk about the pre-event meeting that we hold to help get you going, and some things that are different about adventure events compared to, for instance, mountain bike races or running races or other things like that. And so there's reasons why you need to come in early to get ready for it. How difficult is the navigation? I bring this one up because I know that it brings people some anxiety in terms of when they hear navigation and realize, hey, I've never used a map and compass to find my way around. How difficult is this going to be? And so I get into that a little bit. And by the way, in this one, I'm going to spend more time talking about navigation. And then finally, I answered the question, what does a typical map and instructions look like? I pulled out a map and instructions from a previous event and showed my cards and said, this is what you would get in this other event. I didn't give away any upcoming events, but I gave it an idea of what past ones look like and what they were about and what you saw. Trying to get my screen to change. There we go. So I'm planning I've got 2 pages for the agenda here. And the first part of it, and a big part of what this webinar is about, is navigation 101. It's how to use a navigating compass. Talk about going off trail versus time on trail, and how do you decide when you go off trail. How do we measure distance on a map? And then how do we measure distance in the field? And I'll go into each of those in detail. How do I know if I went too far? And it's a good question because a lot of times when you're going after something, you're either not far enough or too far in looking for something. And what kind of indicators can you use to tell when you've gone too far? And there are things that we call backstops in the navigating world, that says when I get to this, I know I've gone too far. I'll talk about that. What do I do if I get lost? And when I say lost, I don't mean huddled around a tree and found by a helicopter 3 days later. I mean, you just don't know where you are on the map. You know you're in here somewhere. You can't figure out where you are. How do you figure out where you are? And I'll talk about strategies for getting yourself unlost. And then using a map while biking, because part of the time that you're spent using a map and going around is on a bike. Talk about the safety concerns and how do you get past them. And then I'll get into adventure gear, mandatory and recommended gear. There are lists. There is a list in the MiSCA website under miscabike.com/adventure. That it tells what it is that's required, what is the mandatory gear, and what are the things that we recommend that you bring. And I'm going to go through all of those things. Preparation for adventure events. It's a bit different than getting ready for running races, bike races, etc. So I'm going to talk about that prep a little bit. And then finally, I'm going to talk about what adventure events are available outside of MiSCA. Adventure events are not something that was invented by myself. I'm following lots of others, and there are a couple of organizations that that's what they do is they put on adventure events, and I'll talk about those and where you can find them and what you can do to get into those events. So let's get into the meat of it. So, how to use a navigating compass. I've got 4 slides on how to use a navigating compass, and I have a picture here on the right of one of my favorite navigating compasses that I happen to have kicking around the house right now and to use to explain this. So, orienteering compasses or navigating compasses, they have 3 essential components. First of all, they have the base plate. And in the picture on the right here, the base plate is that rectangular thing, happens to be semicircular at the bottom, but it's that clear thing that is the main part of the compass. Secondly, you have the compass bezel. And the compass bezel is the part that rotates. It's the part in the picture here. It has a black inner ring and a white outer ring, and that actually rotates in comparison to the base plate. And so that's the secondary part. And then the third part, very important part, is the floating needle that always points north. And I put always in quotes because I thought in case I forget to mention it later, I want to be clear that you need to be holding that compass not only flat, but away from metal things like a belt buckle or a bike or other things that might attract that magnetic needle. So as long as you're holding it flat and still and it's not stuck inside of the compass bezel, and it's not trying to point towards a piece of metal that you have sitting right next to it, then it will point towards north. So that's the navigating compass. Um, Secondly, the base plate represents your direction of travel. This is an important thing to remember. So the base plate, um, as you are using the compass and you are navigating, you are going to use that base plate as the thing that says, this is the direction that I go. And I'm going to talk about how you make sure that it does show you the direction that you go. But that's the critical thing is it shows you the direction that you go. And you may notice, I'm going to circle something here. Right here is a yellow triangle. And that yellow triangle points away. Here it goes up and slightly left. And it basically says that's the direction of the travel. It's not down and right. It's up and left. And that's the direction that you're going. So step one in determining the bearing of a desired location from your current position. And when I say bearing, I mean what is it north 35 degrees west? Is it due north? Is it due south? That is the bearing. It is if when being very specific and you're not right on north, south, east, west, and so on, then you can assign a number to it that can be north X degrees east or west, or it can simply be given as, for instance, north 10 degrees west would also be stated as 350 degrees because 0 degrees or 360 degrees is due north. 10 degrees to the west of that would be 350 degrees. And so that is what I mean by bearing is what is the direction that you're going. Um, let me go on to the next, just a moment. There we go. Third slide on how to use a navigating compass. The compass bezel rotates. Okay, this is the key thing, is that bezel rotates, but it does once you turn it, it will stay there as long as you're not pushing on it. In other words, there is some friction to hold it in place. And you will need to turn that. So step two in determining the bearing from your direction. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me let me go up one because I think I missed a key point here. Step one was uh, to line up the edge of the base plate to the line of travel. And let me once again, I'm gonna annotate some things here. There is on the left side of the compass base plate right there, there is a circle on the map. And right up here, there is a circle on the map. I've circled both of them. And so let's say I'm trying to go from that first circle that's right next to the compass bezel, and I'm trying to go up to the second circle, which is up there. And let's just say, for the sake of argument for a moment, that I'm going to go directly there. I'm not going to try to take trails. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. What is the bearing of that position? So that's what I've done is I've laid down the base plate so it aligns with the direction of travel between those 2 points. Okay. So now let me move on. So now notice that know that the compass bezel rotates. And so in order to determine the bearing of that desired location from where you want to rotate the compass bezel so that the north on the bezel aligns with north on the map. So remember, we started by putting the base plate on the line that we want to go. Now we're going to realign or align the compass bezel to north on the map. And so when you do that, the other thing that I'll point out is, and it may be a little difficult to see in the view that you have here, but within that compass bezel, there are parallel lines, red lines, that turn with the compass bezel, and they align to north as well. And so in this case, what I have done is, in this picture, if you see those lines, they go due north-south while the base plate is going slightly west of north-south. It's canted by about, I happen to know, it's 14 degrees. But those lines are parallel to north-south lines on the map. So you find anything that identifies north-south on the map, which in most maps, it will be the up direction. Then you get those, you turn the bezel so that those lines are lined up with that, and then it'll be all set. So at this point, the bearing of the desired location can be read directly from the compass. In this case, it's 346 degrees or north 14 degrees west. I'm going to go into that a little bit more on that in the next slide. So I've zoomed in here, and if you take a look at the picture on the left, you can see you see 346 degrees, and you see a little tick mark on the white part, a little marker on the base plate. If you look at the picture on the right, you can see that where that point is. It's basically in the middle of the base plate at the edge of the bezel. There is a marker there, and so once I have turned the bezel, the compass bezel, so that it was parallel on the map, that's where I ended up. And so I know now that the direction of that point from where I am to where I'm going to is 346 degrees or north 14 degrees west. Okay. So now you can lift the compass off the map. You can hold the compass flat. Remember what I said about holding the compass flat and making sure it's away from a belt buckle and any metal and everything like that. And then rotate the entire compass and your body until the needle points to north in the bezel. And in the picture on the right, you can see I've done that. I've aligned it that way. You can see that the red needle is pointing directly toward north. That's where you want it to point. And so that means that the base plate of the compass is now pointed in the direction that I want to go. Okay. Now, having said that, moving on. Now that you know the bearing of that desired point, does that mean that, okay, I'm at, and I've got the map shown here without a compass sitting on it, and those points again, CP 17, CP 18. And I look at them and I say, okay, is that what I want to do? If I'm at CP17, I just want to just ignore everything else and follow the compass and go directly on a line from 17 towards 18, ignoring any trails that are there. The answer is heck no, because for the most part, you can get there, you can get almost all the way there by simply using trails. So that was a good exercise to say, how would I do this if I wanted to go directly without using trails? But it is not necessarily the method you want to get from one given point to another given point that's say hundreds of meters away, especially when there are trails that you can take to get there. So when trails are available, instead of bushwhacking, and bushwhacking is a navigating term, basically means you're going through and you're ignoring any trails and you're just going directly through the brush, through the woods. So instead of bushwhacking through the woods, utilize the trails to get to a point that is known, for instance, a trail intersection or a bend in the trail, so that you can take a bearing for a short distance to get to the desired point. Now, in this particular case, if I was at CP17 and I wanted to go to CP18, I'm going to take the trail up. It's going to go up north and slightly east. I'm going to get onto another trail. I'm going to go west for just a little bit, and then I'm going to take the trail. It's going to meander around just a little bit, and after a while, it's going to go straight. And that point, CP18, and I don't have the scale in front of me to tell me exactly what it is, but from my experience and my remembrance of this point, it's only less than 10 meters off the trail. So I would actually see it right off of the trail. So I really wouldn't need to use navigation in order to get there, except to know, yep, that's north. That's the direction I want to go. When I'm at CP17, I can use the trail map to say, yeah, these are where the trails go. I understand what trails I need to take. I take them up there. I don't really need to take a bearing in order to get there. So when do I go off trail? Generally, the simple answer is go off trail when you are as close as you can get to the point while being on the trail. And in this particular case, it's going to be very close. What about CP19? Let's say we're at CP18 and you want to go to 19. We would do a similar thing. You take your base plate, you put it on between CP18 and 19. I can tell just by looking at it, it's nearly due west. It's probably 10 degrees north of west. And I would take a bearing from there and I would shoot over. But what would I expect to see shortly before I got to CP19? I'd expect to see a body of water. And I'm going to go along the edge of that body of water until I find CP19. So fairly straightforward there. Okay, let's talk about distance. How do I measure distance on a map? So the scale of the map is one of the first things that you should look at, really. When you get handed a map, first thing you want to know about it is what is the scale of this map? So in adventure events in those that I've done for MiSCA, typically the scale on maps that I give out is somewhere between one and well, it is as low as 1 to 3,000, and maybe up to 1 to 10,000. And I'll use 1 to 10,000 for a minute just because it makes the math easy. In a 1 to 10,000 map, 1 centimeter is equal to 100 meters. Okay, that's nice, easy math. I like to be able to do that. So I can measure something out and I can see what the distance is. Well, how do I measure it? Well, you can measure it using your compass because you may have noticed when I showed the picture of the compass, it actually had a scale along the side, typically giving in metric and in English units. I frequently use metric units mostly because the math is easy. If I'm using inches and I'm trying to change to, say, yards, the math is not quite so easy. But when I'm going from centimeters on a map to meters on the trail, it's pretty easy for me to do the math. So you can use that scale for measurement. Then the second way that you can use measurement from a map is you can use the bar scale on the map. Maps always have, and you can see it on the lower left side of the slide here. that there's a bar scale here that you can use to measure. And you can see, in this case, you can see point 0.1, point 0.2, point 0.3, and that's in kilometers. So each of those, point 0.1 of a kilometer is 100 meters. Okay, so each of those little segments, black, white, that's 100 meters. And then the second one that it gives you is in miles. I'll be honest with you, I seldom even use the miles because, as I said, the math is not so easy. So this told me that it's a 1 to 10,000, and it also gave me a bar scale that I can use. So in that second bullet point there, I point out you can use any object, a pencil, the edge of a sheet of paper, your finger, whatever, and say, how far is it from this point to that point? And you measure it out, and you hold it onto a point on the pencil, and you say, oh, it's from the point of the pencil to where I have my finger on the pencil. Now I put that up to the scale and I hold it up and I say, oh, that's about 300, a little over 300 meters or whatever it might be. But you can compare it that way. It is the other way to do it besides measuring it using the scale on your compass. Okay, so now that I know how far something is in the field, great. But how do on the map, that's great. But how do I measure it in the field? In other words, how do I know when I've gone, let's say I've figured out I have to go 350 meters. How do I know when I've gone 350 meters? I don't carry a big long tape measure with me. How do I know? The simplest way to do it is what most navigators will do is they'll know what their typical stride length is. Now, for me, a stride length is approximately 1 meter, and that's from right foot to left foot. That's not right, left, right, but it's just right foot to left foot. One step is just under a meter. Now, it varies a lot, right? If you're going through brush and you're trying to work your way through, it might not be a meter anymore. If you're running, it's probably a little bit longer. If you're walking slow, it's probably a little bit shorter. If you're on a trail, it tends to be a little bit longer. So you got to be aware of these things that it can vary depending on the terrain that you're going through. But in best conditions, if I'm on a trail, if I'm either walking at a good pace so that I have a good length stride or at a jog, about a meter is about right. Sometimes it's a little bit less. So if I need to go 100 meters, I go about 100 to 110 steps. And by the way, I'll point out that I know from my experience of doing adventure racing, typically with the partner that I have done most of my adventure racing with, I'm usually the guy who is responsible for knowing distance. In other words, he might say, Mark, we're going to start out from here. We need to go 350 meters. Let me know when we've gone 350 meters. And then, by the way, he'll shut up. The reason he'll shut up is because if he keeps talking to me, I'm going to lose my count. So he knows, let me count. And I'll usually let him know when we've gone 100 meters, when we've gone 200 meters, when we've gone 300 meters. And then I'll say, okay, we're at 350 meters right here. And so that will help him. So that idea of knowing distance is kind of it's kind of an advanced thing in terms of navigating. But it's a very helpful, especially in more difficult navigating. For the most part, the navigating you're going to do for the 1 hour or the 2 hour type events that I put on for MiSCA, you're generally not going long distances where you need to count to 350, but times might come up when you need to do that. Okay, so how do I know if I went too far? So there are things that navigators call backstops. In other words, a backstop is something that where you look at the map and you say, okay, if I go too far, what am I going to see? And I'll use the example here. I've got a point at the bottom of the map that says CP17, and I have a one further up that says CP16. And I'm going from 17 to 16, and I'm trying to get there. Just by looking at it, if I go past CP16, I go too far, what am I going to run into? In this case, I'm going to run into another trail that it basically tees into. So let me talk about the detail a little more about what I expect to see if I'm going from CP17 to CP16. I'm going to ignore scale for just a minute. I'm just going to take that off the table for a minute. As I start from CP17 and I get going, very soon, short distance into my going up towards 16, I'm going to cross a trail, aren't I? So I know I'm going in the right direction. If a short way into the traverse, I'm going to cross a trail. A little bit further up, the trail is going to curve around to the left. I expected to see it curve to the left. And then it's going to curve to the right. And then I'm going to get to a fork. And what am I going to do at that fork? Well, I'm going to go to the left at that fork. And I'm going to go up there and then I'm going to see it bend and it's going to bend to the right. And shortly after that, then I should see that point CP16. As I mentioned in the backstop discussion, if I go past it and I get to a T, then I know that I've gone too far. Okay, so that's just kind of basic trail navigating. And by the way, much of the navigating that you're going to do in MiSCA events, the relatively simple navigating that we're going to do in MiSCA events, most of it is done on trails, and very little bit of it is done off the trail. Okay. All right, what do I do if I get lost? And once again, when I say lost, I don't mean that you're going to stay there until dark and a helicopter is going to find you in with search lamps later on. What I mean is that you're not sure where you are. You know that you were trying to go, for instance, we'll use the same idea. You're going from CP17 to CP16. You're going in that direction, and you're not sure where you are. What do you want to do? How are you going to get yourself reoriented so that you can figure out where you are? And a good simple rule of thumb is take a trail in one direction or another, whatever it makes sense, to find a map feature that might be a trail intersection, it might be a stream, it might be a hilltop, it might be a valley. In this case, there are a lot of trail features to look for, curves in the trail and intersections of trail. And so if you go in one direction or another, you're going to see that and you're going to see one of those trail intersections and you're going to realize, oh, okay, wait a minute. Here's a Y in the trail. I think this Y, this fork in the trail is probably that point that's just south of CP16. Okay, now I get it. Now I know that I need to go up and I'm going to go north in order to get there. Sometimes it's difficult to talk yourself into doing this because you say, no, I think I know where I am. And then you end up wasting time looking for the point, and then you find out later that you were 200 meters away from where you ought to be. So it's a good idea before you waste too much time trying to find something, not really knowing where you are. It's just do a little bit of moving up and down on the trail, going one direction or another, and look for an intersection, some kind of a feature that gives you an idea of where you are. Okay, let's talk about using a map while biking because part of adventure events is mountain biking. And there is a map that you're going to use while you're doing the adventure event. So you should be having one hand on the bar and the other hand holding onto the map. No, no, no. That is not what I encourage at all. That would be an unsafe thing to do, especially when you add on to that. Now you're going to look at the map and try to read it while you're holding on to only have one hand on the handlebar, and then you run into a stump or a root or a rock or a hole, and you end up going over the bars. So definitely not a good idea. Um, it is generally a good idea to have your map inside of some kind of a case anyway. And if you don't have a map case, which is fine, maybe you haven't gone out to an adventure store or an REI and bought a map case, and so you just used a freezer bag. A gallon freezer bag is pretty good. It'll hold an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper pretty well, and that's typically what I provide maps in. Other adventure events might give you larger maps, but typically I don't. And so you can use one of those. Generally, while you're biking, what you want to do is you want to have, if you are using a map case and it has loops on it, and you have a way to use a carabiner or something like that to attach it to your camelback, that's generally what I do while I'm biking, is I just attach it to myself and I go ahead and bike. And then when I want to look at the map again, I stop, pull it off of the way that it's attached to me, and take a look at it, figure out what I need to do, attach it back up, get back on the bike and go. But please do not. And these folks are doing it right. They're at a stop and they're looking at the map together. I think it's great because here's an example of a coach working with a student, and not just telling him where to go, but saying, hey, this is where we are in the map. This is what I think. This is what we're going to do next. And so they're sharing that information. And by the way, in adventure events where you're working together as a team, it's always a good idea to do that, to share your thoughts with another person. Not only to allow them to feel included in terms of what you're doing, but also so that you have an opportunity to be told that perhaps what you just said doesn't make sense. So does it make sense what I just said? And if the other person says, no, 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 I don't think we're there at all. I think we're over here on the map. Then you can have a discussion about it. Many times it has happened with me and in my adventure race partners where my partner has said, follow me. And I'll say, wait, show me. And I'd take a look at it, and I might actually question what the strategy was. And we worked together. And in some cases, he said, you know what, you're right. That isn't where we are. This is what we want to do. Thank you. And so that collaboration can be very helpful. All right, let me talk about adventure gear. And I want to talk about this for primarily because what you need to bring to an adventure event in order to be successful is definitely it's a longer list of things than what you need to bring to a bike race, for instance. For a bike race, you need your bike, you need a helmet, you need your shoes, you need safety glasses. Yeah, it's a good idea that you have a camelback. Um, in an adventure event, there are more things than that you're going to want. I've got a picture here of several of the things that I would typically bring, which in addition to those things that I mentioned, includes a map case, a compass, and a pair of running shoes. In some cases, it's also required that you have, for instance, a first aid kit. In some cases, it's required, not just recommended, that you have insect spray and things like that. So the the um, the list of gear that is available on the MiSCA website has both the required and the recommended gear, and I'm going to talk about both. So let's talk about the mandatory gear first. And this is directly from the MiSCA website. And so if you're doing an adventure challenge for MiSCA, these are the items that are required. Now, per person, required to have a mountain bike makes sense. Helmet, you don't need to wear it except while you're on your bike, but you need to have it when you're on your bike. Safety glasses required on all legs. And people have asked me the question do I need to have it while I'm running, while I'm on foot? And the answer is yes. The reason for that is that you're going to spend part of your time off trail where there is brush and there are things that can get into your eyes. And so it is a safety item. It does make sense to have them. I wear them through the entire duration of every adventure event that I do. Running shoes. And I make this required because I could just make it recommended, but I've seen people be very sad because they tried to do the on foot portion of an adventure event in bike shoes that are hard soled, stiff soled, and don't have very good traction, and were miserable. And so I do make it required that you have running shoes. Um, and by the way, if you want to do the entire event in running shoes, that's okay too. You don't have to have bike shoes and running shoes. Notice I don't have a requirement of bike shoes in here. I typically do that. I will go from bike shoes to running shoes, depending on what leg of the event that I'm doing. But some people may opt to do the entire event in running shoes and bike in their running shoes, and that's fine. Hydration pack. It is required. And the reason that I require this and not just a water bottle is because a water bottle is fine while you're on your bike. When you're not on your bike, you don't want to have to carry around that water bottle. You want to have something that attaches to you hands-free. The race number, well, we will provide it to you, but you are required to have it with you throughout the race. And then the last item on there is a personal flotation device, which obviously is only required in the paddle legs, and we do provide it. But again, it during the paddle leg of any event, it absolutely is required, and it must be buckled when you're on the water. And then I also have required per team is a compass. In many adventure events, they will require that every person have one. I do not for MiSCA, but I do require that every team has an actual compass, not just an app on your phone. Yes, there are handy apps on phones. I have one on my phone. I use it here and there, and I find it very helpful. The needle doesn't stick, and it doesn't care if if I hold it close to my belt buckle or near another metal object, and it's kind of nice. But there's nothing like using an actual compass where you can set a bearing. Okay, recommended gear. And these are things that I'm not saying that you absolutely must have these things, but I really do recommend them because they're very helpful. First one is recommended per person is a compass. While I said it's not required that every person have a compass, I do recommend that every person has a compass. Why is that? It's going back to the conversation I had earlier about you have one person that has the compass and the map, and they say this way. It's very helpful for someone else to have a compass and go, wait a minute, that doesn't look like the right direction. And if they're not holding a compass, they might not know that. So very helpful. I recommend that everybody have a compass. And then the second one is long pants or tights. And that's especially hard. We're going to have event July 26th. Chances are good it's going to be hot. And a lot of people are going to say, I just want to do it in shorts. Okay, you can, but I don't recommend it. I have finished many adventure events in the past, either with poison ivy or with a heck of a lot of scratches on my lower legs from thorns. So I really recommend it. It's a very good idea. I very seldom do an adventure event in shorts. Very, very seldom. And then recommended per team. One or two large map cases or large Ziploc bags, as I mentioned, a gallon storage bag that it actually can work pretty well. Only problem is it doesn't have hooks on it to hook it to something, and so you can poke a hole through it. But now you've lost your waterproof ability of it in case of rain or anything. So a map case or Ziploc bag, and then insect repellent. Very good idea. You might start the event and you say, boy, it doesn't seem very buggy at all. Yeah, well, wait till you get in the woods. It could get a lot worse. So it's a good idea not just put on an insect repellent before you go out into a 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hour event, but to carry it with you. I have reapplied insect repellent during adventure races many, many times. It's always a good idea to have it. It's a strong recommendation. And then the last one there is a highlighter and or pens for marking up instructions. Not so much for while you're out in the field, but during the pre-event meeting, the pre-race meeting, I'm going to be making a lot of comments. I'm going to be telling you a lot of stuff. And a lot of times people want to write something down or they want to highlight something in the instructions or highlight something on the map. And they say, can I borrow your pen? And next thing you know, we're all out of pens. So it's a good idea that you bring your own. Okay, we're nearly done. Only a couple slides to go here. Preparation. I'm bringing this up because I've done many adventure races. I've also done running races. I've done bike races, and between the different types of events, the preparation required for an adventure event is definitely it's a higher level than it is for a bike race, for instance. As with any race, you got to make sure you and your bike and your clothing are ready. But the second bullet there is assure that you and your teammates have all the appropriate gear per team. So you might assume that one of your teammates is bringing the map case, for instance, or bringing the compass, and they assume that you brought it. And if you didn't communicate with each other, then you're going to show up there and you're going to realize nobody has a map case or a compass or whatever it might be. So that communication beforehand is helpful. And then that third bullet point is pretty important too is whoever your teammates are, if they're not traveling with you and or members of your family, agree on where or when you're going to meet your teammates. For instance, when I've done events in the past, I tend to be one of those guys that wants to get there early. And so that I have plenty of time and I can double check everything and all that. And I often have had teammates that want to get there at the very last minute. We have to be there by 7:15. I will be there at 7:16. And that's it. And I've been there for, half an hour or 45 minutes before then. But they told me that they weren't going to get there till 7:15, so I wasn't expecting them any sooner. They might be in a little bit more of a hurry and a panic and getting themselves ready than I am, but at least we had that conversation and I knew what to expect. So it's a good idea to have that conversation the night before. And I believe this is our last slide. What adventure events are available outside of MiSCA? As I said, adventure is not something that I thought of. This is not it is not new in the state of Michigan or in the country. There's adventure events going on all over the place, and especially within Michigan, I want to point out that there are two organizations that put on adventure races outside of MiSCA. One of them, the organization is called Michigan Adventure Racing, and I've got the website there, michiganadventureracing.com. And the other is Lost Arrow Sports. So Michigan Adventure Racing is located in Grand Rapids area. Mark Van Tongeren is the guy who puts that on. He was very helpful to me when I was getting started and putting on adventure races myself. And the other is Lost Arrow Sports, which these folks, Steve and Angel Simpson, if I'm not mistaken, they live in Brighton area. I know a lot of their events they put on in either Brighton Recreation Area or at Island Lake or some of the locations in that area. So they're located in Southeast Michigan. Michigan Adventure Racing is located in West Michigan. And typically they do events in, somewhat close to home for them. But I've done several events over on the west side of the state with Michigan Adventure Racing. Both of these groups do a great job putting together the events. They're terrific people. And if you ever want to do one of their events and you go out there to do them, please tell them that I said hi and that I sent you. And you learned about adventure through me and through MiSCA, and they know who I am. Terrific people. They do great events. And if there are any additional questions, please unmute yourself and I'll be happy to answer them. But if not, I would just leave you with the contact information. You can reach out to me directly at mware@miscabike.org. You can reach me by email that way. If you have any questions about registration for our events, you can go to the address there. And general information, miscabike.org/adventure is where all of our good stuff is, and you can get information there. And that ends our webinar. Thank you.